or weak consumer protections just by their evaluation of the terms and conditions. You think that's possible?
Congressman, I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Well, can the average person, the average layperson, look at the terms and conditions and make the evaluation, is this a strong enough protection for me to enter into this? Look, I'm as bad as anyone else. I see an app, I want it, I download it, I breeze through the stuff, just take me to the good stuff in the app. But if a consumer wanted to know, could they know?
Congressman, I think you're raising an important point, which is that I think if someone wanted to know, they could. But I think that a lot of people probably just accept terms of service without taking the time to read through it. I view our responsibility not as just legally complying with laying it out and getting that consent, but actually trying to make sure that people understand what's happening throughout the product. That's why every single time that you share something on Facebook or one of our services, right there is a control in line where you control who you want to share with. Because I don't just think that this is about a terms of service, it's contextual. You want to present people with the information about what they might be doing and give them the relevant controls in line at the time that they're making those decisions, not just have it be in the background sometime or up front, make a one-time decision.
Yeah, let me move on to something else. Mr. Pallone brought up the issue of he wanted to see more regulation. We actually passed a bill through this committee last Congress dealing with data breach notification, not so much for Facebook, but for the credit card breaches. A good bill. Many of the friends on the other side of the dais voted against it, but it was Ms. Blackburn's bill, and I think it's one we should consider again in light of what's going on here. But you also signed a consent decree back in 2011. And, you know, when I read through that consent decree, it's pretty explicit. And there is a significant fine of $40,000 per violation per day. And if you've got 2 users, you can see how those fines would mount up pretty quickly. So in the course of your audit, are you extrapolating data for the people at the Federal Trade Commission for the terms and conditions of the consent decree?
That is, I'm not sure what you mean by extrapolating data.
Well, you've referenced there are audits that are ongoing. Are you making that information from those audits available to our friends at the agency at the Federal Trade Commission?
Congressman, as you know, the FTC is investigating this, and we are certainly going to be complying with them and working with them on that investigation.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to our committee. I want to follow up on what my friend from North Texas talked about on his cartoon. Next month, the General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, goes into effect in the European Union. The GDPR is pretty prescriptive on how companies treat consumer data, and it makes it clear that consumers need to be in control of their own data. And Mr. Zuckerberg, Facebook has committed to abiding to these consumer protections in Europe, and you face large penalties if they don't. In recent days, you've said that Facebook intends to make the same settings available to users everywhere, not only in Europe. I understand correctly that Facebook would not only make the same settings available, but that will make the same protections available to Americans that they will to Europeans.
Yes, Congressman, all the same controls will be available around the world.
Okay. And you commit today that Facebook will extend the same protections to Americans that European users will receive under the GDPR?
Yes, Congressman, we believe that everyone around the world deserves good privacy controls. We've had a lot of these controls in place for years. The GDPR requires us to do a few more things, and we'll extend that to the world.
There are many requirements in the GDPR, so I'm just going to focus on a few of them. The GDPR requires that the company's request for user consent to be requested in a clear and concise way using language that is understandable and be clearly distinguishable from other pieces of information, including terms and conditions. How will that requirement be implemented in the United States?
Congressman, we're going to put at the top of everyone's app a tool that walks people through the settings and gives people the choices and asks them to make decisions on how they want their settings set.
One of the GDPR's requirements is data portability. Users must be permitted to request a full copy of their information and be able to share that information with any companies that they want to. I know Facebook allows users in the U.S. to download their Facebook data. Does Facebook plan to use the currently existing ability of users to download their Facebook data as the means to comply with the GDPR's data portability requirement?
Congressman, I think we may be updating it a little, but as you say, we've had the ability to download your information for years now, and people have the ability to see everything that they have in Facebook, to take that out, delete their account, and move their data anywhere that they want.
Does that download file include all the information Facebook has collected about any given individual? In other words, if I download my Facebook information, is there other information accessible to you within Facebook that I wouldn't see on that document, such as browsing history or the inferences that Facebook has drawn from users for advertising purposes?
Congressman, I believe that all of your information is in that file.
GDPR also gives users the right to object to the processing of their personal data for marketing purposes, which according to Facebook's website includes custom micro-targeted audiences for advertising. Will the same right be available to Facebook users in the United States, and how will that be?
Congressman, I'm not sure how we're going to implement that yet. Let me follow up with you on that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, as a small, Facebook conducted a couple of years ago an effort in our district in Houston for our small businesses, and it was one of the most successful outreach I've seen. So I appreciate that outreach to helping small businesses use Facebook to market their products. Thank you.
Gentlemen, the chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Tennessee, Ms. Blackburn, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, I tell you, I think your cozy community, as Dr. Mark Jameson recently said, is beginning to look a whole lot like the Truman Show, where people's identities and relationships are made available to people that they don't know. And then that data is crunched and it is used, and they are fully unaware of this. So I've got to ask you, I think what we're getting to here is who owns the virtual you online? And I'd like for you to comment. Who do you think owns an individual's presence online? Who owns their virtual you? Is it you or is it them?
Congresswoman, I believe that everyone owns their own content online. And that's the first line of our terms of service. If you read it, says that.
And where does privacy rank as a corporate value for Facebook?
Congresswoman, giving people control of their information and how they want to set their privacy is foundational to the whole service. It's not just an add-on feature or something we have to comply with.
Well,
the reality is, if you have a photo, if you just think about this in your day-to-day life.
Well, I can't let you filibuster right now. A constituent of mine who's a benefits manager brought up a great question in a meeting at her company last week. And she said, you know, healthcare, you've got HIPAA, you've got Gramm-Leach-Bliley, you've got the Fair Credit Reporting Act. These are all compliance documents for privacy. For other sectors of the industry, she was stunned that there are no privacy documents that apply to you all. And we've heard people say that, you know, and you've said you're considering maybe you need more regulation. What we think is we need for you to look at new legislation. And you're hearing there will be more bills brought out in the next few weeks, but we have had a bill, the Browser Act, and this is bipartisan, and I thank Mr. Lipinski and Mr. Lance and Mr. Flores for their good work on this legislation. We've had it for over a year, and certainly we've been working on this issue for about 4 years. And what this would do is have one regulator, one set of rules for the entire ecosystem. And will you commit to working with us to pass privacy legislation, to pass the Browser Act? Will you commit to doing that?
Congresswoman, I'm not directly familiar with the details of what you just said, but I certainly think that regulation in this area...
Let's get familiar with the details. As you have heard, we need some rules and regulations. This is only 13 pages. The Browser Act is 13 pages, so you can easily become familiar with it. And we would appreciate your help. And I got to tell you, as Mr. Green just said, As you look at the EU privacy policies, you're already doing much of that. If you're doing everything you claim, because you will have to allow consumers to control their data, to change, to erase it. You have to give consumers opt-in so that mothers know. My constituents in Tennessee want to know that they have a right to privacy, and we would hope that that's important to you all. I want to move on and ask you something else, and please get back to me once you've reviewed the Browser Act. I would appreciate hearing from you. We've done one hearing on algorithms. I chair Communications and Technology Subcommittee here. We're getting ready to do a second one on algorithms. We're going to do one next week on prioritization. So I'd like to ask you, do you subjectively manipulate your algorithms to prioritize or censor speech?
Congresswoman, we don't think about what we're doing as censoring speech. I think that there are types of content like terrorism that I think that we all agree we do not want to have on our service. So we build systems that can identify those and can remove that content, and we're very proud of that work.
Let me tell you something right now. Diamond and silk is not terrorism.
Gentlelady's time's expired. Chair recognizes gentlelady from Colorado, Ms. DeGette, for 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, we appreciate your contrition and we appreciate your commitment to resolving these past problems. From my perspective, though, and my colleagues on both sides of the aisle in this committee, we're interested in looking forward to preventing this kind of activity, not just with Facebook, but with others in your industry. And as has been noted by many people already, we've been relying on self-regulation in your industry for the most part. We're trying to explore what we can do to prevent further breaches. So I want to ask you a whole series of fairly quick questions. They should only require yes or no answers. Mr. Zuckerberg, at the end of 2017, Facebook had a total shareholder equity of just over $74 billion. Is that correct?
Sorry, Congresswoman, I'm not familiar.
At the end of 2017, Facebook had a total shareholder equity of over $74 billion, correct?
Of over that?
That's correct. You're the CEO.
The market cap of the company was greater than that, yes.
Greater than 74. Last year, Facebook earned a profit of $15.9 billion on $40.7 billion in revenue, correct? Yes or no? Now, since the revelations surrounding Cambridge Analytica, Facebook has not noticed a significant increase in users deactivating their accounts. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, since the revelations surrounding Cambridge Analytica, Facebook has also not noticed a decrease in user interaction on Facebook, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Now, I want to take a minute to talk about some of the civil and regulatory penalties that we've been seeing. I'm aware of 2 class action lawsuits that Facebook has settled relating to privacy concerns. Lane versus Facebook was settled in 2010. That case resulted in no money being awarded to Facebook users. Is that correct?
Congresswoman, I'm not familiar with the details of that.
You're the CEO of the company, correct?
Yes.
Now, this lawsuit was settled. Do you know about the lawsuit?
Congresswoman, I get briefed on these.
You know about this lawsuit, Lane versus Facebook, yes or no?
I'm not familiar with the details.
Okay, if you can supplement, I'll just tell you, there was this lawsuit and the users got nothing. In another case, Fraley versus Facebook, it resulted in a 2013 settlement fund of $20 million being established with $15 individual payouts to Facebook users beginning in 2016. Is that correct?
Congresswoman, I'm not familiar.
You don't know about that one? Okay, well, I'll tell you
with our
what
team,
happened.
but I don't remember the exact details of it.
Okay, now as a result of a 2011 FTC investigation into Facebook's privacy policy, do you know about that one?
The FTC investigation?
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Okay, you entered into a consent decree with the FTC, which carried no financial penalty for Facebook. Is that correct?
Congresswoman, I don't remember if we had a financial penalty.
You're the
but
CEO of the company, you entered into a consent decree, and you don't remember if you had a financial.
I remember the consent decree. The
Uh-huh.
consent decree is extremely important to how we
Yes.
operate the company.
I would think a financial penalty would be too. Okay, well, the reason you probably don't remember it is because the FTC doesn't have the authority to issue financial penalties for first-time violations. The reason I'm asking these questions, sir, is because we continue to have these abuses and these data breaches. But at the same time, it doesn't seem like future activities are prevented. And so I think one of the things that we need to look at in the future, as we work with you and others in the industry, is putting really robust penalties in place in case of improper actions. And that's why I ask these questions.
Gentlelady's time's expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, the whip of the House, Mr. Scalise, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Zuckerberg, I appreciate you coming here. I know, as some of my other colleagues mentioned, you came here voluntarily, and we appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion because clearly what your company's been able to do is revolutionize the way that people can connect, and there's a tremendous benefit to our country. Now it's a worldwide platform, and it's helped create a shortage of computer programmers. So as a former computer programmer, I think we would both agree that we need to encourage more people to go into the computer sciences because our country is a world leader, thanks to your company and so many others. But it obviously raises questions about privacy and data and how the data is shared and what is a user's expectation of where that data goes. So I want to ask a few questions. First, would you agree that we need more computer programmers and people to go into that field?
Congressman, yes.
That's a public service announcement we just made, so appreciate you joining me in that. On Mr. Shimkus' question, it was really a follow-up to a question yesterday that you weren't able to answer, but it was dealing with how Facebook tracks users, especially after they log off. And you had said in relation to Congressman Shimkus' question that there is data mining, but it goes on for security purposes. So my question would be, is that data that is mined for security purposes also used to sell as part of the business model?
Congressman, I believe that those are that we collect different data for those, but I can follow up on the details of
All right, if you could follow up, I would appreciate that. Getting into this new realm of content review, I know some of the people that work for Facebook, Campbell Brown said, for example, this is changing our relationship with publishers and emphasizing something that Facebook has never done before. It's having a point of view. And you mentioned the Diamond Silk example where you I think described it as a mistake. Were the people who made that mistake held accountable in any way?
Congressman, let me follow up with you on that. That situation developed while I was here preparing to testify, so I'm not able to details.
I do want to ask you about a study that was done dealing with the algorithm that Facebook uses to describe what is fed to people through the news feed. And what they found was, after this new algorithm was implemented, that there was a tremendous bias against conservative news and content and a favorable bias towards liberal content. And if you can look at that, that shows a 16-point disparity, which is concerning. I would imagine you're not going to want to share the algorithm itself with us. I'd encourage you if you wanted to do that, but who develops the algorithm? I wrote algorithms before. You can determine whether or not you want to write an algorithm to sort data, to compartmentalize data, but you can also put a bias in if that's the directive. Was there a directive to put a bias in? And first, are you aware of this bias that many people have looked at and analyzed and seen?
Congressman, this is a really important question. There is absolutely no directive in any of the changes that we make to have a bias in anything that we do. To the contrary, our goal is to be a platform for all ideas.
And I know we're almost out of time, so if you can go back and look and determine if there was a bias. Whoever developed that software, you have 20,000 people that work on some of this data analysis. If you can look and see if there is a bias and let us know if there is and what you're doing about it, because that is disturbing when you see that kind of disparity. Finally, there's been a lot of talk about Cambridge and what they've done in the last campaign. In 2008 and 2012, there was also a lot of this done. One of the lead digital heads of the Obama campaign said recently, Facebook was surprised we were able to suck out the whole social graph, but they didn't stop us once they realized that was what we were doing. They came to office in the days following the election, recruiting, and were very candid that they allowed us to do things they wouldn't have allowed someone else to do because they were on our side. Now, that's a direct quote from one of the heads of the Obama digital team. What would she mean by they, Facebook, were on our side?
Congressman, we didn't allow the Obama campaign to do anything that any developer on the platform wouldn't have otherwise been able to do.
So she was making an inaccurate statement in your point of view?
Yes.
All right.
Gentlemen,
Appreciate the
time
comments and
expired.
look forward to those answers. Yield back the balance of my time.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Doyle, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, welcome. Facebook uses some of the most advanced data processing techniques and technologies on the planet, correct?
Congressman,
Yes
we
or no?
pride ourselves on doing good technical work.
Thank you.
Yes.
And you use these technologies to flag spam, identify offensive content, and track user activity, right?
Among other things.
But in 2015, when the Guardian first reported on Cambridge Analytica using Facebook user data, was that the first time Facebook learned about these allegations?
Congressman, in 2015, when we heard that the developer on our platform, Alexander Kogan,
Was that the first time you heard about it?
that
when it was
Alexander
reported
Kogan
by the
sold
Guardian?
data to Cambridge Analytica?
When the Guardian made the report, was that the first time you heard about it? Thank you. So do you routinely learn about these violations through the press?
Congressman, sometimes we do. I generally think that
Let me ask you this. You had the capability to audit Facebook user data and do more to prevent these abuses. But the problem at Facebook not only persisted, it proliferated. In fact, relatives to other types of problems you had on your platform, it seems as though you turned a blind eye to this, correct?
Congressman, I disagree with that assessment. I do think that going forward, we need to take a more proactive view of policing what the developers do. But looking back, we've had an app review process. We investigate.
But Mr.
tens of
Zuckerberg, it
thousands
seems
of apps a
to us
year.
that it seems like you were more concerned with attracting and retaining developers on your platform than you were with ensuring the security of Facebook's user data. Let me switch gears. Your company is subject to a 20-year consent decree with the FTC since 2011, correct?
Congressman, we have a consent decree, yes.
And that decree emerged out of a number of practices that Facebook engaged in that the FTC deemed to be unfair and deceptive. One such practice was making Facebook users' private information public without sufficient notice or consent, claiming that Facebook certified the security and integrity of certain apps when in fact it did not, and enabling developers to access excessive information about a user and their friends. Is that correct?
Congressman, I'm not familiar with all of the things that the FTC said, although I'm
But these
very
were part
familiar
of
with
the
FTC's
consent
order
decree.
itself.
So I think I'm just concerned that despite this consent decree, Facebook allowed developers access to an unknown number of user profiles on Facebook for years, potentially hundreds of million, potentially more, and not only allowed but partnered with individuals and app developers such as Alexander Kogan, who turned around and sold that data on the open market and to companies like Cambridge Analytica. Mr. Zuckerberg, you've said that you plan to audit tens of thousands of developers that may have improperly harvested Facebook user data. You also said that you plan to give all Facebook users access to some user controls that will be made available in the EU under the GDPR. But it strikes me that there's a real trust gap here. This developer data issue is just one example. But why should we trust you to follow through on these promises when you have demonstrated repeatedly that you're willing to flout both your own internal policies and government oversight when the need suits you?
Congressman, respectfully, I disagree with that characterization. We've had a review process for apps for years. We've reviewed tens of thousands of apps a year and taken action against a number of them. Our process was not enough to catch a developer.
I see my time is almost over. I just want to say, Mr. Chairman, that to my mind, the only way we're going to close this trust gap is through legislation that creates and empowers a sufficiently resourced expert oversight agency with rulemaking authority to protect the digital privacy and ensure that companies protect our users' data. What's going to go back?
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair recognizes the Chairman of the Subcommittee on Digital Commerce and Consumer Protection, Mr. Latta of Ohio, for 4 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Zuckerberg, thanks very much for being with us today. First question I have is, can you tell the Facebook users that the Russians and the Chinese have not used the same methods as other third parties to scrape the entire social network for their gain?
Congressman, we have not seen that activity.
None at all?
Not that I am aware of.
Okay. Let me ask this question. It's a little bit's been going on when you made your opening statement in regards to what you'd like to see done with the company and steps moving forward. There's been a couple of questions, about you're going to be investigating the apps. How many apps are there out there that you have to investigate?
There are tens of thousands of apps that had access to a large amount of people's information before we locked down the platform in 2014. So we're going to do an investigation that first involves looking at their patterns of API access and what those companies were doing. And then if we find anything suspicious, then we're going to bring in third-party auditors to go through their technical and physical systems to understand what they did. And if we find that they misused any data, then we'll ban them from our platform, make sure that they delete the data, and tell everyone affected.
Just to follow up on that, how long would it take to then investigate each of those apps once you're doing that? Because again, when you're talking about tens of thousands and you're going through that entire process, then how long would it take to go through each of those apps?
Yes, Congressman, it's going to take many months to do this full process.
Okay.
And it's going to be an expensive process with a lot of auditors, but we think that this is the right thing to do at this point.
Right.
Before we'd thought that when developers told us that they weren't going to sell data, that was a good representation. But one of the big lessons that we've learned here is that clearly we cannot just take developers' word for it. We need to go and enforce them.
Okay. When we're talking about audits, there's been some questions about this. On the audits, in 2011, Facebook did sign that consent order with the Federal Trade Commission for the privacy violations. Part of that consent order requires Facebook to submit third-party privacy audits to the FTC every 2 years. First, are you aware of the audits? And second, why didn't the audits disclose or find these issues with the developers' access to users' data?
Yes, Congressman, I'm aware of the audits that we do. We do audits every other year. They're ongoing. The audits have not found material issues with our privacy programs in place at the company. I think the broader question here is we've had this FTC consent decree, but we take a broader view of what our responsibility for people's privacy is. And our view is that what a developer did, they represented to us that they were going to use the data in a certain way, and then in their own systems went out and sold it. We do not believe is a violation of the consent decree, but it's clearly a breach of people's trust. And the standard that we hold ourselves to is not just following the laws that are in place, but we just want to take a broader view of this of protecting people's information.
Just about out of time here. Are you aware that Facebook did provide the auditors with all the information they requested when doing the FTC audits?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah. Did Facebook provide the auditors with all the information they requested when they were preparing the audit for the FTC?
Congressman, I believe we do provide the audits to the FTC.
Okay, but all the information is provided. And were you ever personally asked to provide information or feedback in these audits to the FTC?
Congressman, not personally, although I'm briefed on all of the audits by our team.
Mr. Chairman, my time's expired. Are you back?
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Schakowsky, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You have a long history of growth and success, but you also have a long list of apologies. In 2003, it started at Harvard. I apologize for any harm done as a result of my neglect. 2006, we really messed this one up. 2007, we simply did a bad job. I apologize for it. 2010, sometimes we move too fast. 2011, I'm the first to admit that we've made a bunch of mistakes. 2017, this is in connection with the Russian manipulation of the election and the data that came from Facebook initially. I ask for forgiveness. I will work to do better. So it seems to me from this history that self-regulation, this is proof to me that self-regulation simply does not work. I have a bill, the Secure and Protect Americans Data Act, that I hope you will take a look at. Very simple bill about setting standards for how you have to make sure that the data is protected, deadlines on when you have to release that information to the public. Certainly it ought to go to the FTC as well. But in response to the questions about the act and the investigation that you're going to do, you said you don't necessarily know how long. Have you set any deadline for that? Because we know, as my colleague said, that there are tens of thousands. There's actually been 9 million apps. How long do we have to wait for that kind of investigation?
Congresswoman, we expect it to take many months.
Years?
I hope not.
I want to ask you, yesterday, following up on your response to Senator Baldwin's question, you said yesterday that Kogan also sold data to other firms. You named Umoya Technologies. How many are there total, and what are their names? Can we get that? And how many are there total?
Congresswoman, we can follow up with you to make sure that you get all that information.
Yeah, but order of magnitude.
I don't believe it was a large number, but as we complete the audits, we will know more.
What's a large number?
A handful.
Has Facebook tried to get those firms to delete and its derivatives?
Yes, Congresswoman. In 2015, when we first learned about it, we immediately demanded that the app developer and the firms that he sold it to delete the data, and they all represented us that they had. It wasn't until about a month ago that new reports surfaced that suggested that they hadn't, which is what has kicked off us needing to now go do this full audit and investigation and investigate all these other apps that have come up.
And were derivatives deleted?
Congresswoman, we need to complete the investigation and audit before I can confirm that.
You are
What
looking at
represented to
derivatives.
us is that they have, but we need to now get into their systems and confirm that before I want to stand up here confidently and say what they've done.
So Mr. Green asked about the General Data Protection Regulation on May 25th that's going to go into effect by the EU. And your response was, let me ask, is your response that exactly the protections that are guaranteed, not the, what did you say? Yeah, not just the controls, but all the rights that are guaranteed under the General Data Protection regulations will be applied to Americans as well?
Congresswoman, the GDPR has a bunch of different important pieces.
One is around offering controls over every use of people's
Right,
data.
that's one.
That we're doing. The second is around pushing for affirmative consent and putting a control in front of people that walks people through their choices. We're
Exactly.
going to do that too. The second, although that might be different depending on the laws in specific countries and different places, but we're going to put a tool at the top of everyone's app that walks them through their settings and helps them understand what is
It
going on.
sounds like it will not be exact. And let me say, as we look at the distribution of information, that who's going to protect us from Facebook is also a question. Thank you.
Gentlelady's time's expired. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Washington State, the conference chairman.
Oh, yeah, turn on.